He walked into war without a weapon, just faith, bare hands, and a promise to save lives. But when bullets flew and brothers fell, Elijah Turner became the soldier no one expected. In a dimly lit barracks tucked away from the eyes of command, Private Elijah Turner sat hunched on his cot, his uniform torn, his face bruised, and his spirit almost crushed. A fake sergeant, swaggering with false authority, leaned in and asked, "Do you recognize who did this to you?" Elijah didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than a scream. He glanced at the officer, then turned away as if to say, "It doesn't matter." In the official report, Elijah simply wrote, "No one touched me. I tripped in my sleep." But the truth was far more brutal. He had been jumped by his own bunkmates the night before. Their reason? Elijah had refused to carry a rifle. To them that made him weak, dangerous, unworthy of the uniform. They mocked him, shoved him. Even the girls in the support unit laughed behind his back. His superiors ignored his requests for leave he had filed just to marry the woman he loved. That moment, too, was ripped away from him. Instead of standing at the altar, Elijah found himself locked in a military holding cell, branded a coward. But he never raised his voice, never changed his mind. Even when brought before the military court, he stood tall and said, "I joined the army to save lives, not to take them." His conviction was not born from stubbornness. It was forged from fire. Years earlier, as a boy, Elijah had accidentally hurt his younger brother while roughhousing. His brother lay unconscious for hours. Elijah, frozen in horror, stared at a painting on the wall. Cain standing over Abel, staff in hand, the guilt etched into his face. From that moment, Elijah swore to never hurt another soul. His father, a World War II veteran, had barely survived his tour, one of only 3 in his platoon to make it home. But survival came with scars. PTSD, alcoholism, outbursts. Once he nearly shot Elijah's mother during a drunken rage. Only her pleas brought him back. That memory became another oath. Elijah would never, ever touch a gun. Years later, fate would test him. While walking home from his shift at the lumber yard, he saw a man collapse from a ruptured artery in his leg. Elijah didn't freeze. He tore his belt off, tied a makeshift tourniquet, and flagged down a passing car. At the hospital, the doctor told him, "If it weren't for you, that man wouldn't be alive." In that moment, Elijah found purpose. And in the hospital hallway, he also found love. Her name was Camille, a nurse with a quiet strength and a smile that disarmed him instantly. She was the one who took his blood when he volunteered to donate. From that day forward, Elijah found every excuse to visit the hospital. Camille noticed, of course, but instead of pushing him away, she welcomed him. He wasn't just handsome, he was sincere, and eventually she said yes. But just days before the wedding, Elijah made a decision that would change everything. Inspired by his brother, who had recently enlisted and haunted by his father's legacy, he too chose to serve, not as a soldier with a rifle, but as a combat medic. His parents objected. His mother, a deeply religious woman, couldn't bear the thought of him going to war. His father simply shook his head and said, "War doesn't make heroes, it buries them." Still, Elijah went. Before he left, Camille pressed a small Bible into his hands. Inside, a photo of her and a note, "Come back whole." Elijah believed he would. But nothing prepared him for what came next. Due to a clerical error, he was assigned not to a medical unit, but to an infantry platoon. His new unit was brutal. The sergeant barked orders like a drill hammer, pushed rookies to the edge. One soldier practiced throwing knives shirtless until one blade slipped and lodged itself in the sergeant's boot. Instead of punishing him, the sergeant ripped the knife out, laughed coldly, and forced everyone to keep training. "No excuses," he barked. "Out there, pain is your teacher." And for Elijah, the lesson had just begun. The brutal hazing continued without pause. One drill required each soldier to tie a double knot that could save their lives during descent. But when Elijah Turner stepped forward and tied it perfectly, the sergeant sneered. "Looks like you're making a bra, boy." The mockery wasn't the end. That same day, the sergeant demanded everyone choose a rifle from the rack. Elijah stood motionless. Laughter erupted around him as all the guns were taken. The only one left caught the sergeant's eye. He marched up to Elijah. "Well, didn't you pick a weapon, soldier?" Elijah calmly replied, "Because I don't carry one, sir." That answer got him hauled straight to the captain's office, where he was pressed to explain himself. Elijah stood firm. As a devout Christian, he would not carry a gun or participate in training on the Sabbath. The captain chuckled. "Then you've got two options: follow every order I give, or get kicked out for being mentally unfit." But when evaluated by the base psychologist, Elijah was found completely sane, just deeply principled. They offered a compromise. If he could pass medical training, he could serve as a medic. But the captain had no patience for what he saw as cowardice. Elijah was isolated, made to watch others shoot, while he was assigned every dirty, exhausting job imaginable. The sergeant went out of his way to humiliate him, flipping his bed, fining the whole platoon under his name, and turning his roommates against him. The bullying escalated. They jeered at him, cursed him, even stole a photo of Dorothy, his fiancée, to mock him. One night, while Elijah was sleeping, several men dragged him from his bunk and beat him. It wasn't until someone switched on the lights that they scattered. Bruised and bloodied, Elijah remained silent. When the sergeant questioned him, Elijah claimed he had fallen out of bed. That choice stunned everyone. It wasn't cowardice, it was conviction. Elijah refused to become bitter. Even after being denied leave for not passing his rifle exam, he would not break. The captain threatened military court unless he picked up a gun. Elijah chose prison instead. Dorothy waited on the chapel steps for a wedding that never happened. Her father tried to console her, saying maybe Elijah got cold feet, but she knew better. He was never the type to run. Behind bars, Elijah clung to his beliefs, even as Dorothy pleaded with him to fake it just once. But he wouldn't betray his faith. "Faith doesn't mean anything if you give it up when it's hard," he said. Elijah was brought to trial. Even sympathetic soldiers couldn't understand why a man who wanted to save lives would be treated like a criminal. His refusal to touch a gun was clear, and the military court prepared to convict him. Then, out of nowhere, Elijah's father appeared, dressed in his tattered World War II uniform. He handed a letter from his old commander to the court and walked away. Inside the letter was a declaration. Elijah had the legal right to serve as a medic without bearing arms. The judge dropped the charges immediately. Elijah was free. Dorothy had called her parents for help, and her father had tracked down the very officer who once led Elijah's dad into battle. That officer not only vouched for Elijah's right to serve unarmed, but arranged for him to become a medic. At last, Elijah and Dorothy were married. But soon after, in May of 1945, Elijah's unit was deployed to Okinawa, one of the Pacific's bloodiest battles. At first, the new recruits laughed and joked, unaware of the horrors waiting. That changed when trucks rolled in from the front, filled with corpses. Silence took over. Only the engines rumbled. Their mission was to replace the platoon ahead of them. They climbed Haxoric Ridge, a sheer cliff under naval bombardment. Explosions painted the sky. As they scaled the cliff, blood from previous casualties dripped down onto them. Terror gripped every soldier. But at the summit there was silence. Mist veiled the mountain, and no one knew where the enemy was. They moved forward, step by step, past scattered corpses and twitching rats. Then, movement. A body suddenly sat up, still alive. A burst of gunfire ripped through two men. Chaos exploded. Bullets flew. Bodies were torn apart. Artillery shattered limbs in a matter of seconds. The young men who had climbed up laughing were now facing the unimaginable. Ambulance cries rang through the smoke-choked air. Elijah saw a rookie, barely out of high school, cradling half a body in his arms. Driven by adrenaline and grief, the boy charged forward, gunning down wave after wave of advancing enemies. A Japanese soldier crept toward him from behind, blade raised, until another man lunged out of nowhere, tackling the attacker. They wrestled violently. The rookie fired. The Japanese soldier slumped, lifeless. Only then did the boy realize who had saved him. It was Elijah Turner, the man they once mocked for not carrying a gun. The so-called coward was now the reason he was still breathing. Elijah didn't stop. He rushed to another soldier whose legs had been blown apart by a grenade. The man was bleeding out fast. Elijah wrapped a tourniquet and injected morphine, but the wounds were severe. "Leave me," the soldier gasped. "I won't make it." Elijah shook his head. "You've got a wife and kids waiting. I promised I'd bring you home." He hoisted the man onto his back and sprinted to the cliff's edge where the evacuation ropes were. A few comrades scoffed. "He'll die before you get him down," one said, and cut the rope. But Elijah didn't give up. He ran back into hell. The battlefield howled with pain. Cries for help came from every direction, slicing through gunfire and explosions. Elijah moved like a ghost, dodging bullets, dragging the wounded out of the line of fire. Meanwhile, the rest of the unit was stalled by a concrete Japanese bunker. Rockets barely scratched it. 2 soldiers tried to run explosives forward but were gunned down. Finally, one soldier made it. He shoved a live charge into the bunker's slit. It detonated with a thunderous roar, collapsing the structure and the enemy's front line. The Americans surged forward. After hours of bloodshed, they finally secured a portion of the summit. That night the soldiers tried to rest among the wreckage. The air stank of smoke, blood, and burning flesh. Elijah couldn't stop. There were still too many wounded to treat. He worked through the night, tending to every moaning body he could find. By morning, the laughter of the new recruits had vanished. Most were now corpses. Smithy, the same man who once tormented Elijah, sat beside him, eyes wet with shame and gratitude. "I was wrong," he whispered. "You're braver than any of us." They clasped hands like brothers. As dawn broke, Japanese soldiers launched a surprise counterattack through a hidden tunnel. They came in waves, slashing and screaming. The Americans were overwhelmed. Orders came to retreat. Some soldiers covered their comrades and were cut down instantly. One flamer was shot in the back, igniting the tank strapped to him. Another refused Elijah's help, bleeding out in defiance. Smithy had the chance to escape, but chose to hold the line so others could flee. A bullet pierced his chest. Elijah saw him fall and ran through gunfire to reach him. He patched Smithy up and carried him to the cliff. But it was too late. Smithy died in his arms. Devastated, Elijah looked to the sky. "God, tell me what to do." Then he heard it. More cries for help. Something inside him ignited. He stood tall, eyes burning with purpose, and turned back toward the battlefield. As the rest of the unit retreated, Elijah went the other way, against the current of chaos, deeper into danger. He searched for the wounded amid the rubble. Of the hundreds who had climbed that ridge, only 32 were left alive. He organized them, assigning 2 to guard the path while he kept going. At the summit, he found a soldier barely clinging to life. As he bent to help, another hand grabbed his arm. A second wounded comrade. "I'll come back for you," Elijah swore. He dragged the first man to the edge, but how would he get them down? Then he saw it. A rope, tied with the same double knot he had been mocked for. He anchored it around the man's legs, braced himself, and lowered him over the cliff. Below, the 2 guards were stunned to see injured men descending one by one. They didn't know who was up there, just that someone was saving lives. They rushed the wounded to medics and radioed headquarters. The commanding officer immediately signaled the Navy to cease fire. Someone was still up there, pulling off the impossible. And that someone was Elijah Turner. The Japanese weren't done. Reinforcements surged from the tunnels, heads barely visible before gunfire from below cut them down. The Americans took cover, returning fire wherever they could, but Elijah stayed exposed. He scanned the chaos, eyes darting, searching. Not for enemies, but for survivors. Then he heard it, a faint cry just beyond the ridge. He crawled toward the sound, only to realize the injured soldier's plea had drawn the attention of a Japanese patrol. Elijah didn't hesitate. He buried the wounded man beneath dirt and rubble, then threw himself on top, using his own body as cover. A Japanese soldier passed just feet away. Elijah held his breath. A blade stabbed down. It tore Elijah's jacket, but missed flesh. As soon as the coast cleared, Elijah pulled the man free, whispering, "You're okay. I've got you." But the danger wasn't over. More Japanese soldiers were closing in. Elijah ducked into an enemy tunnel and hurled a grenade behind him. The explosion rocked the passage, giving him just enough time to slip back out under the cover of night. By the time he returned to the ridge, he was barely standing. Blood soaked his uniform. Rope burns laced his palms, his lips cracked from dehydration, and yet his whisper to the heavens was steady. "Just one more, Lord. Let me save one more." Over and over he lowered men down the cliff, American, even Japanese if they were wounded. He didn't see enemies anymore, only lives. Word spread through the ranks below. "There's someone still up there," a medic said. "A lunatic, a hero." By sunrise, Elijah had rescued over 75 men. But it wasn't over yet. While searching for survivors, Elijah spotted his sergeant pinned under rubble, bleeding out. Without thinking, he dashed through sniper fire, dragged the man free, and fashioned a stretcher using a discarded rifle and cloth. He tied the knots, double knots, the kind they once laughed at, and began pulling. As bullets zipped past, Elijah ran for the cliff, the sergeant groaning in pain. At the edge, Elijah secured the rope and gave one final push, sending the man over to safety. But Elijah stayed behind. He wasn't done. He found Smithy's body cold now, still lying where he'd fallen. Elijah tied the rope to him too, lowering his fallen brother gently to the ground, as if tucking him into bed. By the time Japanese forces arrived to retake the ridge, Elijah was spent. He clung to the last rope with both hands, sliding down just as the Navy opened fire again. His body collapsed on the ground, trembling, eyes wide in shock. Soldiers rushed to him, shouting his name. "Elijah, he's here." But he didn't respond. His mind was still on the ridge, still hearing cries, still praying for one more. When the medics cleared him, the captain came forward, his voice soft with humility. "I was wrong about you," he said. "We all were." The next day, another assault on Haxoric Ridge was planned. No soldier wanted to go without Elijah. They waited, silent, eyes on him, as he stood in a corner, praying. Only when he finished did the captain nod. The signal was clear. They climbed again. This time they weren't just soldiers, they were believers, in courage, in faith, in the man who had risked everything to save them. The smoke was thick, the gunfire relentless, but the fear had lifted. Because with Elijah Turner beside them, they believed they just might make it home. But even as victory loomed, the danger hadn't ended. From deep inside a tunnel, a small group of Japanese soldiers emerged waving white flags. The Americans hesitated. Was it truly surrender? Elijah's instincts screamed no, and he was right. The moment the Japanese reached open ground, they hurled 2 hidden grenades. Without thinking, Elijah dove toward the blast. He kicked one grenade aside and tried to shield the others. The second exploded mid-air. The shockwave slammed him into the dirt. Shrapnel tore into his shoulder, but by some miracle he lived. Wounded but still breathing, Elijah was helped to safety as the final push for Haxoric Ridge began. Inspired by his sacrifice, the soldiers rallied one last time. With brutal force and relentless will, they overtook the ridge, capturing it at last, though the cost was staggering. As Elijah was escorted from the battlefield, his hand gripped one thing tighter than his bandages: his Bible. Bloodied, battered, and burned, he never let go of his faith. Haxoric Ridge wasn't just a battlefield, it became a place where history paused to witness something rare. A man with no gun, no armor, and no hatred, standing firm in the face of death, armed only with faith. The story of Desmond Doss, brought to life in the film Haxoric Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson and starring Andrew Garfield, wasn't just based on true events. It was truth. In that brutal World War II battle, Doss saved 75 men, without firing a single bullet. For that, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military recognition in the United States. What makes a hero? It's not just courage under fire. It's the kind of quiet, stubborn belief that refuses to disappear. While others raised weapons, Desmond raised hope. While others marched to war, he walked into hell to pull men out. His hands were not for killing, they were for healing. Faith is not weakness. Faith is resistance. Against fear, against hate, against the world that says, "You're not enough." Doss's story reminds us, you don't have to look like a soldier to save lives. You don't have to be loud to make history. And you don't need a gun to be a warrior. Today, we often honor heroes after they've fallen. But how many of them just wanted to live, to go home, to see peace with their own eyes, not from beyond a grave, but from the arms of their families? War may write destiny in smoke and fire, but even in the darkest trenches, one light can guide others home. Elijah Turner, like Desmond Doss, became that light. Unshaken, undefeated in spirit, he proved that belief, when held tight, becomes stronger than steel. So if ever you wonder whether goodness still matters, remember the man who whispered in the fire, "Just one more, Lord, let me save just one more." Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the brightest light in someone's darkest moment, whether it's a word, a gesture, or a choice to stand for what's right. Compassion carries more power than we often realize. Here at Kindlight Stories, we believe in telling the quiet human stories that remind us who we are and who we can be. If this story moved you, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe, not for numbers, but to help keep the light going, one heart at a time. And as we part ways for now, may we leave you with this. Even a single match can set hope ablaze. Be the warmth in someone's winter. Be the reason they still believe in good. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.